Ray Calloway had stood on that stage for 22 years. He had seen grown men cry over $1,000. He had seen a grandmother do a cartwheel on national television. He had seen every kind of joy and every kind of heartbreak a family can bring into a studio. But on a Thursday afternoon in October, in front of 300 people and 11 cameras, a 71-year-old man walked up to Ray Calloway and slapped him across the face. The room went silent. Security started moving. And then Ray Calloway raised one hand, stopped them, and said 7 words that would take everything that old man had spent 40 years building and end it before the sun went down. To understand what those 7 words did, you have to understand who was standing on that stage. Ray Calloway was 58 years old. He was born in Beaumont, Texas, in the back room of his father's barber shop because the hospital was 20 minutes away and his mother did not have 20 minutes. His father, Junior Calloway, cut hair in that shop for 41 years. His mother, Odessa, worked the lunch line at an elementary school and came home smelling like green beans and industrial soap. They were not rich people. They were not famous people. They were the kind of people who ironed their clothes on Saturday night so they would look right on Sunday morning. Junior Calloway had one rule he repeated so often that Ray could hear it in his sleep. He would be standing behind a customer, scissors in his hand, and some man in the chair would start talking ugly about somebody, and Junior would just keep cutting. Later, when the shop was empty, he would tell his son the same thing every time. You never climb down to reach a man who's already low. You make him climb up to reach you, and if he won't climb, you let everybody see he wouldn't. Ray did not understand that rule when he was 9. He understood it at 58. He had hosted the Family Face-Off since he was 36. He had turned down movie roles to keep doing it. People asked him why, and he always gave the same answer. He said that on this show, ordinary people got to be the most important people in the room for 22 minutes. And there were not many places left in America where that happened. He knew the name of every camera operator. He knew which member of the audience crew had a daughter starting college. He brought his mother's cornbread recipe to the crew Christmas party every single year, and he made it himself. That October, Ray had already told the network that this would be his last season. He had not announced it publicly yet. He wanted to walk out clean, on his own terms with his dignity in his own 2 hands. He had 29 tapings left. He was counting them. Taping day brought 2 families to the stage. The Whitfield family came in from Macon, Georgia. Their captain was Ruth Whitfield, 68 years old, retired after 31 years driving a school bus for the county. Ruth had a laugh you could hear from the parking lot, and a back that had never once been straight since 1994. She had raised her 2 grandchildren, Andre and Simone, after her daughter passed. Her son Curtis had driven them all up in a van with a bad radio and a check engine light they had agreed to ignore for 4 days. Ruth had a reason for being there, and she told the producers about it in the pre-show interview without any drama in her voice at all. Andre was 24 and working 2 jobs. Simone was 21 and had dropped out of nursing school because the money ran out in her 3rd semester. Ruth said, plain as water, that whatever they won that day was going into an envelope with Simone's name on it, and that Simone could argue about it later. The Gaines family came in from Marion, Ohio. Their captain was Walter Gaines, 71, a retired foreman from a parts plant that closed in 2011. With him were his son Dale, 44, his daughter-in-law Karen, his sister Bonnie, and his grandson Eli, who was 16 years old and the youngest person on the stage that day. Now here is the thing about Walter Gaines that matters more than anything else in this story. In Marion, Ohio, Walter Gaines had a reputation. A good one. A big one. He had coached Little League for 19 seasons. He was a deacon at his church for 11 years. He had run the concession stand at the county fair. He had shoveled driveways for widows on his street without being asked. If you walked into the diner on Center Street and said the name Walter Gaines, 4 people would tell you he was one of the finest men in that town. They called him Uncle Walt. There was a photograph of him on the wall at the ball field, holding a trophy surrounded by 11-year-olds in dusty uniforms. And that reputation was true. That was the strange, painful part. It was all true. But there was another Walter Gaines, and everybody in that family knew him too. He was the Walter who said things at the dinner table, Little things. Comments about people on the news. Comments about who was moving into which neighborhood. Comments about the new pharmacist. He had a way of saying them with a smile, so that if anyone objected, he could say he was only joking and they were being sensitive. For 40 years, his family had learned to look at their plates and wait for the moment to pass. Eli had been looking at his plate his whole life. Eli Gaines was 16, tall and thin, with a habit of pulling his sleeves down over his hands when he was nervous. His best friend since 4th grade was a boy named Marcus, who lived 4 streets over, and Eli had stopped bringing Marcus to the house when he was 12. He never told anybody why. He just stopped. Nobody in the family ever asked him about it, because asking would have meant saying out loud the thing they had all agreed not to say out loud. Eli had not wanted to come on the show. Dale had made him. Dale said it would be good for his father, that Grandpa had been down since the plant closed, that this was the kind of thing that might light him up again. Eli said okay. Eli always said okay. In the green room that morning, the two families sat on opposite couches, and Ruth Whitfield did what Ruth Whitfield always did, which was talk to everybody. She asked Karen about Ohio. She told Bonnie she liked her earrings. She turned to Eli and asked him what he wanted to do after high school, and Eli, surprised that an adult was asking, said he was thinking about engineering, and Ruth said that was wonderful and asked him 3 real questions about it. Walter Gaines watched all of this from the end of the couch, and when Ruth finished talking he said something. It was not a slur. It was worse than a slur in a way, because it was small enough to survive. He said, with a little laugh, that it was nice she was so friendly, that people like her usually kept to themselves around here. The room dropped about 10 degrees. Ruth's face did not change at all. She had heard it before. She had heard versions of it since she was 6 years old. She just said, and looked back down at her paper cup of coffee. Karen said, "Dad." Walter said, "What?" It was a compliment. Eli pulled his sleeves down over his hands. The stage manager, a woman named Denise Park who had run that floor for 16 years, saw the whole thing from the doorway. She went and found the executive producer, a man named Howard Fenn, and told him she had a bad feeling about the Ohio family. Howard asked if anything had actually happened. Denise said no, nothing you could write down. Howard said then there was nothing to do. That is how these things always go. Nothing you can write down. The game started at 1:40 in the afternoon. For the first 2 rounds, it was ordinary television. The Whitfields were quick and loud and funny. Andre gave an answer so wrong that the audience groaned for 11 straight seconds, and Ruth smacked his arm and the whole studio loved it. The Gaines family was stiff. Walter kept taking answers away from the others, leaning past his son to hit the buzzer, correcting Karen out loud when she guessed wrong. By the 3rd round, the Whitfields were up by 90 points, and Walter Gaines started to change. You could see it in his shoulders first. He stopped clapping for his own family. When Simone gave a good answer, he made a face at the camera. Between rounds, while the crew reset, he said something to Dale that the boom mic caught but the broadcast would never use. Ray Calloway noticed. Ray noticed everything. He had spent 22 years reading the small weather that moves across a family's face. He walked over during the reset and did what he always did, which was try to lift somebody up. He clapped Walter on the shoulder and said, "Hey coach, 19 years of Little League? You've been down worse than 90 points. Walter did not look at him. He said, "You're enjoying this." Ray said, "I'm not enjoying anything, sir. It's a game." Walter said, "Sure it is." They came back for the 4th round, and Ruth Whitfield told a story. Ray had asked her a throwaway question, the kind hosts ask to fill 20 seconds. He asked her what she missed about driving that bus, and Ruth said she missed the kids. She said she drove Route 9 for 31 years, and that in her first year. 1990, there was a stop where a man used to come out of his house every morning and stand on his porch and watch her load the children, arms folded, just watching, because he did not like who was driving. She said she waved at him every single morning for 2 years. She said one morning in the 3rd year he waved back. And she said that was the day she decided she was going to keep that job until they made her quit. The audience was quiet in the way an audience gets quiet when something real happens in a room built for fake things. Ray said, "Miss Ruth, that's about the best answer anybody's ever given me on this stage." And Walter Gaines said, loud enough for the front 8 rows to hear, "Can we play the game, or is this the sob story hour?" The audience made a sound, not a boo, something uglier and more uncomfortable than a boo. Dale Gaines closed his eyes. Eli looked at the floor and did not look up for a long time. Ray Calloway turned around slowly, and this is the part that matters. He did not fire back. He had 11 cameras on him and a live audience and every right in the world to bury that man with one sentence, and he had the skill to do it, and everybody watching knew he had the skill to do it. Instead, he said, "Sir, this family's earned their time. You'll get yours." Then he turned back to Ruth and said, "Go ahead, Miss Ruth." The 5th round decided it. The question was about things people keep from their parents. Simone buzzed in first and answered, and it was the number 1 answer, and the Whitfield family swept the board and took the game. Final score 340 to 180. The Whitfields came off their platform screaming. Andre picked his grandmother up off the floor. Curtis was crying and pretending he was not. The audience was on its feet. It was by every measure a good day of television. And Walter Gaines stood on his platform and did not move. Denise Park saw it. She started walking. She was maybe 20 feet away. Ray Calloway was crossing the stage toward the Whitfields with his hand out, and Walter Gaines stepped down off the platform and got in front of him. He was shaking, not with fear, with something that had been building for 40 years and had finally found a room with cameras in it. He said, "You had this rigged from the jump." Ray stopped. He said, "Mr. Gaines, go stand with your family." And Walter Gaines said the thing. He said it in front of 300 people and 11 cameras, and his 16-year-old grandson. He said, "You people always take care of your own." Then he hit him. It was an open hand, and it was not a light one. It caught Ray Calloway across the left side of his face and knocked his head sideways. The sound of it went through the studio like a dropped board. Somebody in the 3rd row screamed. Ruth Whitfield's hand went to her mouth. Karen Gaines said, "Dad." In a voice that came out broken, 2 security men were already moving. Denise Park was already moving. The floor director was already calling to cut. In 11 seconds, that room was going to become a very ugly place. Ray Calloway straightened up. There was a red mark rising on his cheek. His earpiece had come loose and was hanging against his collar. He looked at Walter Gaines for about 2 full seconds. Then he raised his right hand, palm out, toward the security men, and stopped them where they stood. The studio went completely silent. Not television silent, real silent. 300 people not breathing. And Ray Calloway did not look at Walter Gaines when he said it. He looked past him, to the platform, at a 16-year-old boy with his sleeves pulled down over his hands. He said 7 words. "I forgive you. Your grandson is watching." Walter Gaines turned around. And there was Eli, standing on the 2nd step of the platform, crying so hard he could not get air. Not the crying of a boy who is scared, the crying of a boy who has just watched the last piece of a story he already knew fall into place in front of the entire country. That was the moment, not the slap, the turn. Because for 40 years, Walter Gaines had been able to keep his 2 selves in separate rooms. There was Uncle Walt at the ball field with the trophy, and there was the man at the dinner table with the smile and the little comments, and the family had kept the door between those rooms shut for him. That was the deal. Nobody ever spoke out loud. He got to be a good man in public. He got to be the other thing in private. And everybody looked at their plates. Ray Calloway did not open that door. He just pointed at it and let 300 people see there was a door. Walter's mouth moved. Nothing came out. He put a hand up toward Eli, and Eli stepped backward off the platform, away from him, and Dale caught his son by the shoulders and turned him toward the exit, and walked him out without ever once looking at his father. Ruth Whitfield came across that stage, 68 years old, bad back, and she came across that stage fast. She did not go to Walter, she went to Ray. She put both her hands on the sides of his face, the way a mother checks a child, and she looked at the mark on his cheek, and she said something the mics caught and nobody edited out later, baby. That was your daddy talking through you just now. Security took Walter Gaines out through the loading door. He did not resist. He went the way a man goes when he has already lost. What happened in the next 4 hours decided everything. Howard Fenn wanted it buried. He was not being cruel. He was being a producer. He told Ray in the dressing room with ice on the man's face that the network would kill the tape, they would reshoot with a standby family, and this would never exist. He said, "Ray, nobody has to see you get hit. You've got 29 shows left. Walk out clean." Ray Calloway said no. He said it 3 times, and the 3rd time he stood up. He said the network was welcome to fire him with 29 tapings left and see how that looked. He said the tape was going to air, uncut, including the 7 words, including Eli, including all of it. Howard said, "Why? Give me one good reason why." And Ray said, "Because there's a 16-year-old boy who has spent his whole life being told he imagined it. And if we cut this tape, he goes home and he imagined it again." The network legal team fought it for 6 days. Ray Calloway won. He also did one more thing, and it is the thing almost nobody expected. He declined to press charges. The police report was filed by the studio, not by him. When the district attorney's office called, Ray told them he would not participate, and he asked that no charges be pursued against a 71-year-old man. He gave one sentence to the Dawes office, and then never spoke about it again publicly. The consequence isn't mine to give him. He was right about that. It wasn't. The episode aired on a Tuesday. By Wednesday morning, the clip had been watched over 60 million times, but the strange thing, the thing media people wrote about for months afterward, was which part people were sharing. It wasn't the slap. Almost nobody shared the slap. What people shared, over and over, in every country was the turn. Walter Gaines turning around. And Eli. In Marion, Ohio, the ground moved. Because here is what a reputation actually is. A reputation is not what you did. A reputation is what a town has agreed to remember, and what a town has agreed to forget. And for 40 years, Marion had agreed to forget the little comments, and remember the trophies. That agreement ended on a Tuesday night. People sat in their living rooms and watched a man they called Uncle Walt say 4 words to a black man on national television, and they felt something turn over in their stomachs, because they had heard him say things almost exactly like that at the fair, at the ball field, in the diner, for years. And they had laughed, or they had not laughed, but they had not said anything either. And now the whole country had seen the thing they had been agreeing not to see. Nobody in Marion ran Walter Gaines out of town. There was no mob. It was quieter and far more permanent than that. The church took his name off the deacon board at the next meeting, with no announcement. The Little League moved his photograph off the wall at the ball field and did not say where it went. The men at the diner did not tell him to leave. They just stopped saving him a seat. 3 families who had known him for 30 years stopped answering the phone. He had shoveled those driveways. He had coached those kids. All of that was still true. It just didn't outweigh the other thing anymore, because the other thing was no longer something anybody could pretend not to know. Walter Gaines lived in that town for another 11 years, and he was never Uncle Walt again. Ruth Whitfield went home to Macon with the money. She put it in an envelope with Simone's name on it, exactly like she said she would, and Simone argued about it for 4 days and lost. Simone re-enrolled that January and finished her nursing degree 2 years later. Ruth sat in the 3rd row at the pinning ceremony in a purple hat that could be seen from space. Ruth was invited onto every morning show in the country and turned down all of them but one. On that one, the host asked her if she was angry at Walter Gaines. Ruth thought about it for a while, long enough that it got awkward on live television. Then she said, "I drove a bus for 31 years. I have waved at a lot of men who wouldn't wave back. I ain't got the energy to be angry. But I'm not going to lie and say I feel sorry for him. Either he got a mirror held up. Most folks never get that." Ray Calloway went back to work the following Monday. He never once mentioned the incident on air. Not one time, in 29 remaining tapings. Reporters asked him about it constantly and he gave them almost nothing. The only time he ever said anything substantial about it was at the very end, at his final taping, when he stood on that stage for the last time and talked to the audience for about 90 seconds after the game was over. He said, "22 years ago my father told me you don't climb down to reach a man who's low. You make him climb up. And if he won't climb, you let everybody see he wouldn't. I didn't understand that until I was 58 years old and somebody put a hand on me in this building. I want to tell you what I finally figured out. That rule isn't about being better than anybody. It's about this. When a man shows you who he is in public, the worst thing you can do to him is answer him in public, because then it's a fight, and people pick sides and everybody forgets what he did. The only thing that actually ends it is to stand still and let people look." He paused, and then he said the last part, and it is the part that ended up printed on posters in high school hallways in about 40 states. "Don't fight ugly. Just don't stand in front of it." And then there is Eli. The letter came about 5 weeks after the episode aired. It was 4 handwritten pages from a 16-year-old, and Ray Calloway kept it in his desk drawer for the rest of his life and never showed it to anybody. He did tell people one line from it. Eli wrote that he had spent his whole life thinking he was crazy, and that when Ray said your grandson is watching, it was the first time in 16 years that an adult had looked at him and said out loud that he was seeing what he was seeing. Ray wrote back. They wrote back and forth for 2 years. Ray sent him a book about mechanical engineering that he bought at an airport because he did not know what else to send. Eli went to Ohio State on a partial scholarship and studied civil engineering, and never once told anyone on campus who his grandfather was. And Eli did something else, in his second year, that nobody asked him to do. He started a small thing at his old high school in Marion. It had no funding and no real name at first, and it was not an anti-racism program, and he was careful about that, because he had seen what happens when you tell people what to think. It was a workshop about how to say something at your own dinner table. That was it. That was the whole thing. How to be the one person at the table who does not look down at their plate. They called it Sleeves Up. 4 years after that afternoon in October, a reporter tracked Eli down and asked him the question everybody wanted to ask, which was whether he had ever spoken to his grandfather again. Eli said yes. He said they talked about once a month, on the phone, mostly about nothing. He said his grandfather had never apologized to him, not directly, not in words, because that was not a thing the man was built to do. But he said that about a year in, Walter had asked him a question, and the question was, "Do you remember that boy Marcus? The one from 4th grade?" And Eli said yes, and Walter said, "Why'd you stop bringing him around?" Eli said he sat with the phone against his ear for a long time, and then he told him the truth. And his grandfather did not argue. Eli told the reporter, "That's not forgiveness." I want to be clear about that. He lost his whole town and he earned that. But he picked up the phone. "That's all I've got. I'm not going to pretend it's more than it is, and I'm not going to pretend it's nothing." Then the reporter asked him the other question, whether he was grateful to Ray Calloway, and Eli said something that ended the interview, because there was nowhere to go after it. He said, "Everybody thinks he did it for my grandfather. He didn't. He didn't say I forgive you to change that man. He said it so that when I got home that night and looked in the mirror, the last thing I heard wasn't my grandpa's voice. It was somebody telling me I wasn't crazy and that I still got to choose who I am." 7 words. He gave me the rest of my life in 7 words, and he did it with a handprint on his face. That afternoon in October is now used in training programs at 3 networks and taught in 2 university communications courses. But the version that matters is not the one in the case studies. The version that matters is the one people actually remember. An old man raised his hand to a man who had never done a thing to him, and the man he hit did not hit back, did not shout, did not take the easy win that 300 people were begging him to take. He just stood still, with his cheek burning, and pointed at a 16-year-old boy on a platform. Walter Gaines spent 40 years building a reputation. It took 7 words to end it, but those 7 words weren't a weapon, and that's the part most people get wrong when they retell it. Ray Calloway wasn't aiming at the old man at all. He was aiming past him, at the boy behind him, at the one who still had time. And that is how you end a man's reputation without ever raising your voice. You don't tear it down, you just stop holding it up for him, and you let everybody, including his own family, finally see what was underneath.